everyone, welcome back to this series on project management videos, and in this case, project management in the real world, which is a really cool thing, in particular the world of film and television. You see, I was looking through the project management body of knowledge the other day. It's not exactly bedtime reading, but there was one interesting thing that I did see, and that's the definition of a project according to the project management body of knowledge. A project is a temporary endeavor. Temporary endeavor undertaken to create or bring about a new product or result, or to bring about change. So also, in your life, what does that sound like? Well, it sounds like films. And there are thousands, maybe millions of films that have been created over the years and over the decades, which is a wonderful thing. And probably the second highest grossing film franchise of all time is the Star Wars franchise. So I thought, how about we look at the project management life cycles and the way they were managed for all these Star Wars films and the Star Wars franchise, which is this hugely grossing franchise. Now, before we delve into that, really quickly, you will probably know, but if you don't, there are different project life cycles, and the main ones we've got, there are four basically. So predictive, which is the main project management life cycle that you will have probably come across. It's where you do all the planning up front, and then you basically go away and you work on it over time, and then right at the end you deliver the result, and people are either happy or people are sad. But there hasn't really been any feedback in between. So it's basically you sort of lock yourself away, make it all happen, deliver the result, and then it's either a good result or a bad result at the end. But it's a predictive, you're predicting all of that scope, schedule, cost, all up front, and then delivering it and in one big bang at the end. Basically over the last couple of years, we've been moving towards a more agile approach. And so this is where these next ones will come into it. Iterative is where we're iterating towards the final result. So it's still a final result, but we're getting feedback at this point, and then we're putting that back into the process, and we're getting feedback at the next point. Maybe they don't like that, maybe they don't like this, and we put that back into the process and we iterate again, and we get that customer feedback, ultimately to still deliver a final product in one big bang. But we've been gathering and iterating towards success that whole time, gathering feedback. Now, the sort of to tag on to that is the incremental project management lifecycle, where we're delivering bits and pieces. So here we're delivering an item, maybe a feature. Here we're delivering a feature. Here we're delivering a feature, and we're also gathering that feedback as we're going along. But either way, it's a piece that a customer can see, feel, and touch. So they're really getting a piece of value. It's an overall feature of the overall product that you're going to deliver. You're incrementally delivering the item to the customer. And at the end of all that, iterative and incremental combines to have our agile approach. So we're iterating, usually in 2 to 4 week cycles, life cycles, 2 to 4 week iterations, sorry. But we're also delivering a feature so that the customer can see, feel, and touch it and give their feedback on that feature. And at the end of the project, you will have delivered all the features, and ultimately the product will be complete. So that's just to give you a bit of background of what we're going to expect when we look at these Star Wars films and how they were done. So let's start with where it all began, and that is the very first Star Wars film. And I absolutely love this story because George Lucas, it's 1976 or 1977, George Lucas had finished his first cut of the film, and he got a whole bunch of his friends, close friends, and some Fox executives as well, and he got them in a room to show them this first cut. But he said, oh, by the way, guys, the music's not in, and the effects aren't done yet either. So it was a really rough cut of the film, and very brave of George Lucas to do this. At the end of that first viewing, there was absolute silence, and people just looked at him and said, "What is this? This is terrible. It's horrible. I don't understand what's going on. This is happening over here. This is happening over here. None of it makes sense. What is this opening crawl with all these words? It's terrible." And as the story goes, George Lucas's wife was in the room. She ultimately ended up editing a better version of it as well. And so this is where we're looking at the iterative approach. It's an iterative project life cycle because George showed that first version of Star Wars and it was terrible. And you know what? That's okay, because he took that feedback and he put it into the next iteration of the film. And that's when we have things like Marsha Lucas coming in and editing. She edited a better version and made a better story and made it flow better and cut out all the dead weight and basically helped turn it into the Star Wars that we know and love today. And then you've got things like the music. John Williams. So John Williams, next iteration, adds his amazing and famous musical score now. So now that goes in, and that's the next iteration. And then we've got the effects, and that goes in, and that's the next iteration. And ultimately, now we've got the end product, which is probably one of the most, which basically spawned one of the most loved franchises out there today, which is an amazing thing. It also has a 96% score on Rotten Tomatoes from an audience score. So that's a nice little gauge of how successful this project management method was in creating Star Wars. That's the iterative approach. Now let's fast forward to about 20 years to 1998, 1999, when George Lucas had finished his first 3 films. They were a huge, huge success, bigger than anything they'd ever expected. And now, because of that, George Lucas kind of had free reign. Basically, he went back to the studios. He said, "I've got 3 more films. They're the prequels, and with these prequels, he said, I want to make them." And the studio said, "Your last films were such a success that you just go for it. Go for it, George. You can do the scope up front. You can do the cost up front. You can do the scheduling up front. You can write the story. You can do all the writing. You can just put everything together, plan it all up front." So we're predicting what everyone wants and what will be successful. Then go away and develop that and release it in one big bang. So what does that sound like? That sounds like our predictive methodologies, so our waterfall methodology. And with that, ultimately, George did go away and he wrote the film, produced, directed, made it all happen. And the Phantom Menace came out in 1999. And the reviews for the Phantom Menace ultimately ended up being it was the worst Star Wars film of all time. So read into that what you will, but the critics hated it, audiences really didn't like it, and so he had put all of this work in, and he'd put his heart and soul into it himself, without necessarily getting feedback from his customers during that time when he's developing and making it happen, until it's ultimately released. The audience score on Rotten Tomatoes ended up being 59%, which I think is almost the lowest, if not the lowest or the second lowest for the Star Wars films. Now fast forward again another 20 years, and now we're in 2019, and we've got 2 things coming out here. We've got one is The Mandalorian, and that was a series. A funny thing had happened the year before this, actually. The Last Jedi had just come out, and that had been really polarizing. In fact, the fan base was starting to backlash. They were starting to say that they wouldn't support any future films, they wouldn't go and see them. There was a real backlash after The Last Jedi, and Disney was starting to get worried. So because of that, feature films had started to take a back seat, and now they're starting to look at series instead. And series are where they're released once a week, or maybe once every 2 weeks, an episode. So we've got an episode here, episode here, episode here, episode here, and they can also gauge the audience's reaction and feed that back into future films, future lore, all of the different things that they're developing for the future as part of the Star Wars universe. So because we're releasing something on a regular basis, we're releasing it incrementally. This is our incremental approach, where we're releasing a feature, in this case, an actual episode that people or our customers can see, feel, and touch and give feedback on, and we're releasing that incrementally to our customers. And with The Mandalorian, it actually ended up being very, very successful. The Mandalorian has a 93% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. And to me, that's a wonderful thing. And it kind of brought back a lot of the viewership in a way. Which leads us to our last idea and our last movie as well in this particular series. We've got The Rise of Skywalker. And again, they had just brought J.J. Abrams back in to do the Rise of Skywalker because the last movie had so divided fans and all the fans were saying that they were going to leave and not support it in the future. Basically, J.J. Abrams had to create the perfect film. It had to please old viewers, it had to please the new viewers. It really had to, men, women, all different ages, all different genders. Basically, it had to be perfect, which is almost an impossible task when you think about it. But what they did was they looked at an agile approach, and this was really great to see as it was unfolding. They would release little bits for viewership to small audiences, and so maybe it would be the introduction or the first part of the film, or maybe it would be the whole film as a rough cut in some cases. But that information would then basically get leaked out onto the web, and this is where they'd first get their feedback from the audience as they were sitting there watching this potential pre-release or this piece of the film. But then as the story was released and leaked, I guess whether it was leaked intentionally or not, who knows, but as it was leaked online and the people hearing about it would give their feedback on the story as it was unfolding. So they would say, oh, I really love what they're doing here, or no, this is terrible, I don't like the way that's going. And so they could really gauge that customer reaction. They were, in a way, iterating towards the final film and the final process, but they were also incrementally releasing bits and pieces that customers could see, feel, and touch to gather and get that feedback that was so valuable and so necessary to try and create the perfect film. And did he succeed? J.J. Abrams, the last film, this is a great part of the story as well. On Rotten Tomatoes, it currently has an 86% audience score. So the audiences, you might say, loved the film. They ultimately had a little bit of input into the story when you think about it, and gave their feedback in many different ways and different forums. And ultimately, audiences were pleased. The critics, however, the critic score was about 52% on Rotten Tomatoes. So you might say it was a divisive film. It divided people again. But ultimately the customers were happy, and that is what Agile aims to do. And even you might say critics of Agile would probably give it a 52% and go back to a waterfall methodology as well. But ultimately, it's a really good representation of the real world, and in a nice, fun way, in a film way, and in a Star Wars way, which is kind of cool as well. I hope this has helped you get an idea of project management in the real world from a Star Wars perspective. I hope you've had a lot of fun, because I know I have, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.